And they said, well, how can they be taken seriously by people like me who hold purse strings for projects and who want to hire archaeologists and who want to understand what on earth CIfA does, especially if they're a management advocacy, if they are a professional advocacy for the management of archaeological and heritage resources. If they can't be clear on what they knew when, how things unfolded, and in that sense, the relationship between cost, benefit, and the overall accounting outcomes, how, to be blunt, how can they be trusted? And that was the word that they used, trusted. How can they be trusted? Hello and welcome back to Watching Brief for the week of the 17th of February 2025. I'm joined as ever by my co-host, Mr. Andy Brockman, and this week we are snuffling through the remnants of a surprise Valentine's package that we received this time last week from the Chartered Institute for Archaeologists. It was a remarkable happening at the end of that week, wasn't it?
As Valentine's truffles go, if we're snuffling through a Valentine's truffle, this particular truffle goes under the brand name of cluster, and then a second word that begins with an F and ends with a K.
Ah, okay, yes, yeah. You spoil me, my ambassador. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, basically, there was a sudden announcement last Thursday afternoon, 13th of February, that the chief executive of the Chartered Institute for Archaeologists, who had only been in post for perhaps barely even 8 months, Nathan Baker, was stepping down immediately, it would appear, and no reason was given. Until later, as you're going to explain in a second. But when we recorded the Watching Brief on Friday, on Valentine's Day, this is how much we love you, dear reader, dear viewer. We did an immediate reaction to what was going on and what we immediately found out. And the key takeaway from that was that Mr. Baker might never have actually left his previous job.
Yeah, and in that sense, there were questions following what was a really rather bland statement by Chairman Penn Foreman regarding Nathan Baker's departure. We were curious as to the timing, as to perhaps why. We weren't interested in digging into. There was a hint at one point on a third party's Facebook page, which was an interesting turn up for the books, that perhaps there was a personal issue at play. We weren't looking to expose or to go into that in any more detail than was necessary. But actually, yeah, what we ended up finding was a series of questions, really, that start with the question, did he ever leave his previous role? Was CIfA therefore possessed of a part-time CEO? Did CIfA know at all that their CEO hadn't left his previous role? Obviously, for more details, do check out that episode. But this week, we went back at this story looking for some more information, because surprisingly we haven't heard anything back from CIfA themselves. I'm stunned by this, but you were able to understand a little bit more about the recruitment process and associated facts and figures.
That's right. Now, again, I think before we start, just very briefly, I ought to explain why we've taken the editorial decision to cover this in as much detail as we have.
Yeah.
Because you might look at this on the surface, well, CIfA's a private company. What's it to do with anybody else who their CEO is? Now, that might be true to a certain extent, but at a significant point in its work, CIfA steps into the public domain. It advocates for archaeology. It lobbies government on behalf of archaeology. It's one of 4 probably principal leadership bodies in archaeology in the UK, the others being the Council for British Archaeology, which links the whole archaeological community, set up in 81 years ago this year. The oldest of the groups, the Society of Antiquaries, based in London, and a very eminent Royal Society, and the perhaps the most sort of thrusting capitalist end of the archaeology sector, the Federation of Archaeological Managers and Employers, which largely represents the companies that hire professional archaeologists to work in the development system.
Yeah.
So
Fame,
F-A-M-E, yeah, fame.
I'm gonna live forever.
I'm going to be an archaeologist. No.
Anyway,
but of course, one of the constant issues in the sector is what archaeologists are paid and the conditions they work under, and how that might not enable you to live, or at least not work forever. At least not in archaeology. But we'll come to that another time. Here, it's important to remember that what CIfA does affects all archaeologists, not just its members. And as I said, that's because it acts as an advocate for the profession. It sets out what it says are professional standards and ethics for the profession, which are taken as benchmarks by people hiring archaeologists. And
in that sense, they act as an arbiter. Or they attempt to act as an arbiter.
And they do that in the context where in the UK, archaeology is not a protected profession. You can be an archaeologist without being a member of CIfA, whereas you can't be a doctor without being a member of things like the British Medical Association. So
and I suppose one final thing to say is that they may be a private company, but I would say, at least in the spirit of how they are incorporated, they are beholden to their members.
Yes.
Paying members, archaeologists, as we say, from a sector that is not the most well paid in the world. And incidentally as well, we'll be talking about the CIfA benchmarking report probably next week. We would have been talking about that sooner, but this
certain events have intervened.
So I would say that they may be private, but they're also a membership driven, and in that sense largely membership funded organization.
Well, I can put that in perspective. Something like 3/4 of CIfA's turnover comes from membership fees from individual members and from what are called accredited organizations. That's archaeological bodies that sign up with CIfA to follow certain codes of practice, terms and conditions.
Okay. Yeah. So you went looking a little bit more to try and understand how we'd got here. What did you find?
Well, it gets quite interesting because, and I should say at the get-go, all of this is open source information in the public domain. There's been no secret squirrel activity. It's open source intelligence and limited use of individual sources, but primarily these are documents that anybody watching this can go and find.
Yeah, we may be archaeologists, but we haven't dug through anyone's middens to find this information.
No, or if anyone knows anything about the history of the tabloid press in Britain, Benji the Bin Man was not employed by us on this investigation.
No.
Google him if you don't recognise the name Benji the Bin Man.
Yeah.
No. So basically, the starting point was the CIfA website, where they have archived the job description for the chief executive, and it's a fixed point on the timeline. Now the timeline begins in 2023, when the very long-serving and respected chief executive of what is now CIfA, Professor Peter Hinton, retired. So he'd been in post for something like 27 years. And so they are really destabilized. Very stable leadership is suddenly thrown up in the air in 2023. So they have to recruit a new chief executive. Or they publish a job description with a closing date for the post of February the 2nd, 2024. Which means that basically in late 2023 into early 2024, they were working on the appointment process.
Okay.
And then it went to advert. Now, if you scroll down to the bottom of the advert, it gets interesting. But the advert itself is lots of sort of motherhood and apple pie, person descriptions, leadership style and attributes. So, they want somebody who's outcome driven with a commitment to excellence, inclusive, promotes diversity, instills purpose and urgency to achieve impactful outcomes, and so on and so on and so on. All the things you'd expect in a senior role like that. And including being financially and commercially astute with strong networking and collaborative abilities, being one of the desirable competencies and skills. But when you go down to the bottom, you find that the applications are not to be submitted to CIfA directly, but with a subject line CIfA Chief Executive to somebody called David Sneesby, who is the CEO of the LSL Group. Now, the LSL Group is based in Mayfair, and it is a high-end corporate headhunter, to use a colloquial term. And it's special. It was set up by Mr. Sneesby in the late 20-teens, after a long period that he'd been working elsewhere across that industry, and he specialises in work, for example, with professional bodies. If you look at their website, the British Medical Association is another one of the bodies they say they work with. So basically, the CIfA board has outsourced direction of the process to a high-end corporate headhunter.
Which, given their aspirations, given the way that they seek to operate, makes sense, I suppose. And indeed, maybe even drawing in someone who comes from outside the world of archaeology could add to the outlook of CIfA, could plug it into a whole world of interactions that would really enrich its members' prospects. So, by no means, as I've seen some people suggest, maybe why did they go for someone who wasn't an archaeologist? Well, that could have been a deliberate breath of fresh air going for Nathan Baker. Yeah,
I suspect it probably was, and this is why.
Yeah.
I looked further on the on the LSL Group website, and they have a page of scrolling testimonials, and one of those testimonials is from Dr. Penn Foreman of the Chartered Institute for Archaeologists.
Okay.
And it is a testimonial referring directly to this process, and it actually gives us information about the process which we hadn't got from anywhere else.
And just to be clear, they are the honorary chair who announced the departure of Nathan last week. So they're involved in the beginning, seemingly, and the end of his association with CIfA.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah.
And what Dr. Foreman says in the testimonial is, first of all, Mr. Sneesby and the company were already known to CIfA because they provided development training for CIfA management in the past. So it may well be that they went directly to somebody they knew and trusted, which again is perfectly legitimate. I mean, you might argue, yes, they did it go to, did they do a competitive tender on this? What would be quite an expensive investment? Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But the upshot is, anyway, David Sneesby was overseeing the recruitment process for CIfA's new CEO, working with, as Dr. Foreman's testimonial also says, a working group that was set up within the CIfA board. Again, this is absolutely commonplace. I'm involved in a similar process myself at the moment. So, although we're not using corporate headhunter. So, as things developed, the testimonial also refers to the very close relationship that the working group had with Mr. Sneesby, that he offered, quote, very strong recommendations and suggestions. And you mentioned, about possibility of going outside the archaeological industry, and that may well have come out of those sort of discussions. We don't know, but there's a reasonable assumption that that's a possibility.
Yeah, and in many ways that's acting as a good consultant as well.
That's what a consultant does.
This? Yeah,
that's exactly what a good consultant does. Yeah. Absolutely. And the result was, and this is the sort of hostage to fortune that is there in the testimonial, that was clearly published before the events of last week. But Dr. Foreman refers to that work between Mr. Sneesby and CIfA'S working group, having produced a, quote, extraordinary long list, end quote, of potential candidates, and, quote, an excellent pool, end quote, of, quote, strong candidates. Now, obviously, the hostage to fortune is the candidate, the extraordinary and strong candidate they chose only stayed in post for 8 months.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing that's interesting is that Dr. Foreman refers to Mr. Sneesby attracting candidates not just through direct advertising, but through, quote, his extensive contacts and networks. In other words, he was tapping people up. He was going through his contacts list and saying, okay, that person might be a good fit, and giving him a ring or dropping him an email and saying, look, this post is up for grabs. Do you would you be interested? I think you'd be a good fit. Da 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 da.
Yeah.
You know, if you were to go and also further, if you were going to go and do that, what would you be asking for? So you can feed back to the client.
Yeah.
You know, things about, okay, you need to offer a larger salary or offer, you know, or possibly, and we'll discuss it maybe in a minute, possibly make the job not full time. So, you know, those sorts of things could well have been under discussion. Certainly, there was a lot of close discussion between CIfA and their consultant. Entirely proper, but begs a lot of questions. Now, the next fixed point we know is that on the 25th of April 2024, so around 3 months after the closing date for the advert, on the advert, CIfA members were told on X-Twitter, quote, CIfA is delighted to announce the appointment of a new CEO to replace Peter Hinton, who is retiring from the role after more than 25 years. Nathan Baker will join CIfA as CEO in early June from the Institute of Occupational Medicine, where he is currently chief executive. Now, note that word from. It implies he's departing from his previous post with the IOM to join CIfA. Now, as we well know, as we discussed in last week's programme, it would appear that, in fact, Nathan Baker never left the Institute for Occupational Medicine. He was representing them at an industry conference in December. He's still listed on their website as CEO. He's listed on Companies House as the company secretary.
And a hypothetical here would be to say one could have worded that along the lines of CEO of the Institute of Medicine is providing his time and his expertise to be also CEO of CIfA. Something like that, something which made it clear what was happening. But again, it's a hypothetical, but also, again, it's in the context of, I'm imagining it as being a statement for membership, so that people understand what they're paying their subs towards, what CIfA is up to, so on and so forth. Yeah.
And I should point out, again, I've got no proof of any connection here. I've asked, I've not had any reply back. So I'm just asking it, I'm pointing out a possibility, for example. And again, there's nothing wrong in this, but it's just nobody was told if this is what happened. But the Institute of Occupational Medicine has a commercial consulting arm. And for example, there could have been an arrangement with that arm of the IOM. Could have been an arrangement with Mr. Baker in a personal capacity. We don't know, you know, it depends on what his terms and conditions are at the IOM as to what he can do in terms of extracurricular activity. But either way, what CIfA announced they had and what they actually had appear to be two different things.
Yeah, yeah. A watching brief is a formal programme of observation and investigation to record and report on notable discoveries on an archaeological site. As part of our ongoing watching brief, Andy and I work hard to bring you the best, the worst, and sometimes the more quirky happenings from the world of archaeology. We aim to provide a space where voices can be heard, opinions shared, and sometimes truth spoken to power. If you believe in the work we do, please consider supporting us on Patreon for as little as $1 per month. Thank you. Okay. So we've added a bit more detail in that sense to events. Is there anything else that we know?
Well, we've got a pretty good idea now as to what this all cost.
Right.
Because the recruitment process, and if you remember, I mentioned that it appears to have started in probably mid to late 2023, went into 2024, and they announced the end of the process in late April 2024. Now, all but about 3 weeks of that process fall within CIfA'S 2023-2024 accounting period, which the accounts were published. And so I went and had a look at them, as anybody else can. They're published on the CIfA website. Corporate transparency, absolutely correct. When you look at the accounts, there is a line for recruitment costs, and that appears every year for the last 5 years I've looked at. For the most of the 5 years that I've looked at, the recruitment costs were 500 to 1,000 or so pounds. The lowest was 514. The previous highest was 4,574 pounds in 2022.
Okay.
For 2023-24, the period during which Nathan Baker was being recruited, the recruitment costs that CIfA paid out jumped to £19,818. And to put that in perspective, the previous year, CIfA spent £1,181. So £1,181 turns the next year into 19,818.
Wow.
And that is to recruit somebody who was only in post for 8 months.
Okay. Like that's a factor of, well, close to a factor of 20. Factor of 17 or so. I haven't done the maths off the top of my head, but that's a big jump. Okay. 19,000. Okay.
Yeah. Now, okay, I'll be generous to CIfA and say that some of that may be the kind of costs that were covered in previous years. So even if we knock several £1,000s off of that, to recruit Nathan Baker cost CIfA members at least a couple of £1,000s a month, given that he was only in post for less than 8 months.
Yeah, and that's recruiting, not paying.
That's recruiting. That's regardless of any salary. Yeah. Absolutely.
And that's incidentally, that I was close, not a factor of 17, factor of 18. There you go.
Right. You're far better at maths than I am.
Oh, no, I've got a calculator. So, okay. So that, and again, that's recruitment, not pay. Okay. Anything else that we know?
That's pretty much it at the moment. Now, obviously, there are lots of questions that go begging in all of this. I've been repeatedly emailing CIfA, so it's on the record, since last Friday when we first covered this. And they have absolutely blanked any response. Obviously, company accounts are complicated things, and it's very easy to jump to conclusions which aren't appropriate. So I'm only going with what we actually know at the moment. We're still crunching through the numbers. I'm still crunching through the numbers. I'm still taking advice on the numbers. But one thing we can say, because it's absolutely there in the bottom line, is that in that accounting period, 2023-2024, CIfA ran a deficit of £64,561, which was higher than the previous years by a factor of almost £10,000.
Okay. How do you think CIfA members can think about this and perhaps even respond to it?
That's a very good question, and I said at the start of this episode that what CIfA does is important to the rest of the sector. But obviously, as a membership-driven organisation, CIfA members have the most important role in this. And all I can say is CIfA members might want to ask themselves, should they be more robust with the CIfA board in terms of getting the board to be transparent? The board has got itself into difficulties like this before. I mentioned the issue of pay minima. So, if they are interested in corporate development and professionalising the organisation for the modern world and so on, actually having a more open discussion where criticism is accepted and taken on board and responded to might be a good way to go. As it stands, so far as I can tell, looking at, for example, options on social media, CIfA has disabled comments on any of these issues, where they appear in X, Twitter, where they appear in Facebook.
Yeah.
There appears to be next to no discussion in even independent social media outlets about this. There appears to have been a sort of omerta has gone out that we're not going to talk about it. And I'm not sure that's good for the sector, and I certainly don't think it's good for CIfA in the long term.
No, and I'll expand a little bit on a point I made last week, that was the idea of people looking in to the sector and trying to think about budgets, or perhaps sending work into the realm of archaeology and so on and so forth, or in heritage and heritage management. And I've actually clarified this by talking with a friend who's a local councillor. And I was sort of explaining this situation, and they're like, "No, that's ridiculous." I was like, "Yep, these things happened, it seems, but we can't clarify it because there's no statement." And they went, "No, that's ridiculous." So, "Yep, there's no statement. We have no idea what's going on." And as you say, comments are now closed off on social media. And they said, "Well, how can they be taken seriously by people like me who hold purse strings for projects and who want to hire archaeologists and who want to understand what on earth CIfA does, especially if they're a management advocacy, if they are a professional advocacy for the management of archaeological and heritage resources, if they can't be clear on what they knew when, how things unfolded, and in that sense, the relationship between cost, benefit, and the overall accounting outcomes, how, to be blunt, how can they be trusted?" And that was the word that they used, trusted. How can they be trusted? And it's a fair question. So, I mean, I know that you're reluctant to draw any more conclusions. I'm not going to draw any more conclusions from the accounts, just to put you at ease, Andy. But what we have there, though, is the expenditure on recruitment, not salary, being 1/3 of what ends up being, at the bottom line, the deficit. Now, how that's related, complex ins and outs, we don't want to necessarily go into that or make any firm statements on. But it's not great for 8 months worth of return. And then also as well, there's the question of is it clear at all from any information that we've seen whether Baker had some sort of parting aspect in his clause? Was there a golden handshake or something?
Or does money end up being owed to CIfA? The short answer to that is we just don't know.
We don't know.
It may be that CIfA will be recompensed for what's happened. It may be that CIfA ends up out of pocket for what's happened, with lessons to learn, but we're not being told what those lessons might be and how they might be learned. It's opaque. It's a London piece super of a fog surrounding this. And as I said, I think in the end, we're journalists specialising in archaeology and heritage. All we can do is ask the questions.
Yeah.
All we can do is try and bring some accountability. In the end, it's ultimately, in this case, the CIfA members who can either get to the bottom of this because they think there's something awry, lessons that maybe need to be learned about all sorts of things, including corporate comms, or they might decide, oh, shit happens, we'll move on. But as I say, for the rest of the sector, I think we need to know. Yeah,
I agree. And for my part, I think I would say is how many more times can we keep moving on from, and I think I used the phrase to you the other day, and I don't mind sharing this, that in that sense, it feels like in some respects we're giving an awful lot of the best years of our professional lives to an industry that at times appears to be determined to behave like a cottage industry. and is being dragged kicking and screaming into the light of scrutiny, clarity,
Corporate professionalism.
yeah, collaboration, not having an instinct to, and in this instance, I'm not necessarily talking about this instance, but in other instances, having an instinct to lie, actually, and to just make up something because just talking clearly about something is embarrassing. On the one hand, I guess coming back to the situation, what we have is a chartered institute that wants to have the accountability of your mate Dave, who's made a bit of an embarrassing mistake. And I don't think you can have both. I don't think you can be the chartered institute, and also as well. Well, let's just not talk about that bit, because it was a bad bet on crypto, and just leave it. I don't think that's great.
And again, without betraying any confidences, I think it's fair to say that I've certainly seen responses from CIfA members to this who are concerned. They do think that CIfA needs to look at what it's doing and how it's doing it. And however this happened, and it may not be CIfA's fault,
No.
but however this happened, it shouldn't have happened. And to learn lessons, you need to know what's happened.
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll report on this again when there's something to report, I suppose. Hopefully there will be more clarity at some point in the near future, as you say, what has happened. Next week, we'll examine, at least in part, we'll be examining the CIfA benchmarking report, which was their follow-up to another kerfuffle with the membership over whether or not CIfA would be making recommendations on pay benchmarking. And I still have a whiff in the air, I do believe, of a certain Graham Hancock episode that we're working on. that you've definitely still got in your intro, but again, it's been an exciting couple of weeks a busy couple of weeks.
And not just that, I put it out on Blue Sky this afternoon just before we started recording. But obviously, archaeology is a proudly international discipline. We work with colleagues in other countries all the time without thought of borders. And so what is happening currently to our colleagues in the United States in terms of both the impact of President Trump's executive orders and the activities of the Elon Musk Doge doggies is really concerning. We're seeing reports, we're seeing social media responses, all of which are saying that people are feeling threatened, they're feeling intimidated, people have actually lost their jobs. And there appears to be absolutely no plan. That Musk appears to be going through doing what he did at Twitter, which is basically sack everybody and then find out where the holes are, and backfill them, which is a really, when it comes to running a government, when people's lives are at stake, is a really, really dangerous, arrogant thing to do. We want to cover that story. Obviously, on this side of the Atlantic, we have different perspectives to our colleagues who are actually living through it in the States and in Canada and in Mexico and so on. So if you are being impacted by what's happening at the moment as a result of the Trump administration and Elon Musk, we want to tell your story. We want you to tell your story. So please get in touch with us. You can get in touch with us in confidence. You can use DMs on Blue Sky. The pipeline has a contact, a list of contact suggestions. I'm on Signal, which is an end-to-end encrypted app, texting app. But remember, stay safe. There are support networks around, and if you do want to contact any journalist, and your stories do need to be told, but do stay safe. Do make sure you don't use a work device to do it.
Yeah, fair point. On that note, actually, I should say also that in that sense, work devices are amongst some of the things that are having to be handed in at short notice and so on and so forth. One person who I'm going to be reaching out to possibly for comment, maybe even to get him on the show, was talking about how he had been individually responsible for, I think he said 30 million acres, not hectares, acres of land. And he was one of 12. So there were 11 other people in similar situations to him who had been sacked as well at short notice. So that's millions and millions of acres of heritage landscapes that were being actively cared for, investigated, disputes with landowners were being managed, so on and so forth, and it's just gone. So yeah, be careful. Thank you for watching, everyone at home. Thank you for your time, as ever, Andy Brockman, and please do comment below, as ever, if there's anything else that you think we should be covering, or if there's something that you'd like to add to this story. And
don't forget to like and share and subscribe to the watching brief.
Yeah. Do all the YouTube things. Yes. Until next time, do take care.